Often, I enjoy walking my dog at nighttime. This is due to the fact that my dog is harder to walk when people are around with their own dogs, so we tend to walk around parks in the area when they become somewhat secluded. I'm not a very big guy, I'm just about 5'10" and very lanky, so I wouldn't call myself an intimidating figure. However, my 120-pound black lab boxer mix named Loki would be somewhat considered threatening to most from what I hear. I figured his size would be used as a deterrent for anyone looking to cause nightly troubles. I was dead wrong. On one specific night in the fall of 2016, I could recall of an encounter that reminds me of why I'm so reluctant to walk around once daylight falls. This specific park is one I've been to a couple of times, and from what I remember, this park is usually secluded around 6:30 and later. Aside from a couple of joggers or very few other dog walkers, not many people walk the same path that I take. I also like to put on my headphones and listen to music while I walk, but on this specific night I chose not to wear them since my phone was on low battery and I wanted to preserve it as long as I could. The walk was going as usual. Loki did his business and we continued on our usual path. About midway on our walk, I realized that it had started to get really dark. Since he was done with his business, I decided to cut the walk somewhat short and we took a shortcut that kind of led us off the path. This path had a bunch of trees surrounding the area and there were still leaves on the branches. With that being said, I felt a weird feeling as if though I were being watched. I have pretty bad anxiety sometimes, but since I knew the town was safe, I knew that nothing was going to happen. But still, I could not for the life of me shake off the feeling of being watched. I peered back to see if anyone had been following me out of anxiety, and every single time, no one was there. In fact, no one was anywhere. This whole shortcut was essentially secluded. Suddenly, Loki stopped walking and also looked back. I told him, "Loki, come on boy, we gotta go." One thing I failed to mention was that Loki is a big coward. I noticed his tail was tucked between his legs, which is a telltale sign that a dog is afraid. I was also curious and a bit nervous, but I surely didn't want to find out what he heard or noticed. I just wanted to get out of there ASAP. I pulled a little and he began to walk, but every now and then I'd see him peer back. After maybe a minute or so of walking, he stopped again, and this time he began to growl. Despite being a coward, Loki is a bark but no bite kind of dog, so I took this chance to see exactly what he was growling at. It was quite dark, so I couldn't see well, so I used my phone's flashlight to see what was up. Trees. Just trees. What he heard was probably some kind of small animal. Once again, I turned around and kept walking. He continued to peer back once in a while still, but this time I noticed it was a lot more frequent. I just said to myself, "It's just a squirrel, maybe a bird," and I ignored it. Then I heard what appeared to be actual footsteps and branches breaking. There's absolutely no way a small animal could have produced a sound like that. Loki turned around quick, and still with his tail tucked, he began to growl and bark at a figure that I could only describe as a man in his early 50s, possibly late 40s, appearing from out of the woods. He was dressed in dirty clothing. His hair was long and was graying. He had one hand in his pocket and he said to me, "Nice dog you have there, kid. What breed is he?" He's a boxer lab," I replied. "Oh, I love dogs. Mind if I pet him?" he asked. The man got closer and emerged from the trees. As he got closer, I realized that he was quite tall and a bit burly. Loki instantly got bad vibes and he ran behind me and started to bark at him. Actually, I do kind of mind. My dog here doesn't like strangers. Sorry, but it's probably not best if you pet him," I quickly stated. "It's okay. Really. He seems like a friendly guy, just a little pet wouldn't harm him," the man retorted as he got closer. I felt extremely uncomfortable as he appeared to get closer and closer. I don't know why this guy couldn't take no for an answer. I mean, I usually don't allow people to pet Loki unless he comes up to them first. If he's scared of you, then I usually do not want to freak him out by letting him be pet by a stranger. This is especially the case when said stranger came from the woods, behind a few trees. "I'm really sorry, man. I'm scared he might bite you or something," I told him as he began to walk away. Like I said before, I wasn't trying to be judgmental or anything, but the dude came from the woods and was possibly the one trailing us from before. I don't know why you just won't let me introduce myself to him," the guy replied angrily. This time I began to speed walk. I was very uncomfortable and my flight or fight instincts began to take over. He followed us and kept muttering curses to himself. I don't know if this man was under the influence of something, but he did not let up. I won't lie, I started to get a little angry. Why can't a guy just take no for an answer? He began to match my speed, almost as if he was trying to catch up to us. Loki and I both took this as an answer to start sprinting a bit. I don't remember much of the running, it was all just a blur to me, but I do remember the spine-tingling feeling of hearing his footsteps rapidly increasing behind me. For a man of his stature, he was incredibly fast. I also realized that his intentions may not have just been to pet my dog. No one reasonable would go that far just to pet a dog that clearly wanted nothing to do with him. I looked behind me and he was definitely in pursuit. Maybe only 10 feet behind me, and he was literally chasing us. I'll never forget the look in his eyes. I've never had anyone look at me like that. A look of killer intent. And all for what? Just because he couldn't pet my dog. My instincts told me that he definitely had sinister intentions behind that gaze. And finally, the path led to the park exit and into the busier streets. I only lived about 10 minutes away from the park, and when I looked back, the man was gone. In my mind, I honestly thought that I had lost him. I made doubly sure that no one else was following me, and I even made sure to walk on the populated streets. After what seemed like an eternity, we got home, but I knew for a fact that I was not going to get a minute of sleep. From my window in the porch, I walked all night with Loki, just to see if anyone had followed us home. I also made a police report with my parents. After all, this guy seemed to have been quite suspicious, and who knows what his true intentions were. Had his target been someone who couldn't protect themselves or run away, what would he have done? I also often ask myself, what if I had worn my headphones and the sound of music drowned the footsteps behind me? Ever since, I haven't walked Loki in that park. I've also made it a habit of mine to walk on more livelier streets at night. If I could give anyone one piece of advice, even if you live in a relatively safe town, don't ever let your guard down. You never know what kind of person might be lurking in the shadows. This happened literally a month ago, back in February, when my boyfriend and I had decided to try out an open relationship for a little while for various reasons. We live separately in one of the larger cities in the north of Middle America, and there's a decently sized population of college students, like me, to keep the gay community fresh, so I was doing pretty well for myself. One night I was bored and scrolling through Grindr, looking for an easy hookup when I got a message from a guy who was barely 800 feet away. He wasn't terrible looking, and I was a little desperate, so I agreed to go to his place. He lives quite literally down the street from me. I can see his building from my window, so I walked over and he let me up and into his apartment. We made small talk and I mentioned where I lived. Heck, I even pointed out my window from one of the windows in the stairwell. From the first get-go, I thought that there was something off about the guy. Not necessarily bad, just very different. An odd twitch in his hands when he gripped the banister. The vacancy of his eyes when he smiled. I'm not so cliché as to say he felt evil or anything like that, but I wasn't exactly surprised that after he got to his apartment, the first thing he did was to tell his very pretty and friendly cat to say hello, and the second thing he did was walk over to the kitchen counter, grab a needle, and shoot up. I hadn't even closed the door behind me. I stood there, staring, and he turned around, dropped the needle on the counter and went, "Oh, should have asked. You cool with that?" I am not a good Christian boy. I have broken into a church while tripping on LSD. I've had intimate relationship on a headstone back in high school, but I have my standards. So I shook my head mutely, pulled my hat back on, and opened the door to leave. The guy rushed over and put a hand on my shoulder. "Yo, I'm sorry. You don't gotta go. We don't gotta do anything. Do you want to watch Transformers 3 with me or something?" "Nope," I said bluntly, hustling away down the stairs. I bundled up my scarf against the early February chill and hurried back down the street to my apartment. He followed me downstairs, barefoot, in pajama pants and a t-shirt, until I stepped outside into the whipping winds. I turned back briefly to look after a moment, and he was still standing there in the doorway, watching me. I didn't have any premonitions of doom or weirdness. I grew up in Missouri. Junkies barely register as odd to me by this point, so I went home and went to bed. Now, you might have guessed it, but I'd never seen this dude around the neighborhood before. Truthfully, I hadn't seen most of the neighbors because my neighborhood is an odd mixture of white-collar suburbia, college housing, and low-income housing like my Paramore's building, all on one street. So it didn't really register when I started seeing him more. I would leave for work in the afternoon and he'd be on the other avenue across from my building, strolling along. Or he'd cut across my building's parking lot like all the kids in the neighborhood did. A couple of times I saw him walking across the campus mall. My apartment building is directly adjacent to my campus, but he'd always swerve to avoid me. Once or twice I'd notice him in the grocery store I worked at as a barista, but it's the only one within walking distance, and he mentioned he didn't have a car. This went on for the entire month of February. Eventually, I started noticing. He'd always be walking down the street opposite my building when I left for work at my usual time, and he was only ever at the store when I was working. He'd never approach the coffee stand within the store, where I work, but he'd look at me. A couple of times I noticed him enter, look at me, pretend to shop, and leave without buying anything. I was starting to feel creeped out, but he hadn't done anything yet to make me feel particularly unsafe. One day, late February, I worked an early shift. When I got off, I felt a little crazy from lack of sleep, and I reached my place about 20 minutes before I usually leave for work. And on the corner of the sidewalk opposite me was the guy. He was checking his watch over and over and looking up. I did a bit of brilliant deductive analysis and followed his gaze up to my living room window. Then I looked back down at him. He looked right at me. There was a moment of tension as we stared at each other in the eyes. Like I said, this dude didn't give off any evil or dark vibes. I've met people that do that. No, what I saw in this guy's eyes, in his face, was much more human and much scarier. Desperation, loneliness, pain, and anger. He hurried after me, but I'm 6'3" and a former sprinter, whereas he was a 5'8" junkie wearing flip-flops on ice. I made it to the first set of doors to my apartment, scanned myself in through the second, and locked them behind me. He walked through the unlocked first set, tried to open the second, tried pushing the handicap button to open them, and then gave up. "Look, man, I'm sorry," he shouted, laying a hand on the glass of the door. "Can we just talk about it?" I shook my head. "Absolutely not. Leave me alone." Then I whirled on my heel and stomped over to the elevator. When I turned back, he was gone out into the snow. I didn't see him for a couple of weeks afterwards, which is nice because my boyfriend likes to walk down the street past the dude's apartment when he stays over and needs to go smoke. One night, my boyfriend was over at my place. He'd just gone out to smoke before we went to bed, and he mentioned that he wanted me to come with him the next time he went out. "Why?" I asked, pulling him in close to me while he shivered. "It's dark and cold, and I get paranoid out there sometimes," he mumbled in my chest. "There's this creepy dude that sometimes stands in the corner across the way and just stares at the building. One time he asked me for a cig and I told him I didn't have one when I had one literally in my hand. He laughed, kissed my chin, and passed out. I laid there awake, troubled. When I was sure my boyfriend was deeply asleep, meaning after about 5 minutes had passed, I extricated myself and went to the window. It was a cold, clear night. I could see across the street under the orange glow of the streetlight was the guy. I couldn't make him out clearly, but when he saw me, he waved. I flicked him off and closed the blinds. I didn't feel like I should tell my boyfriend because he was either going to immediately go to the police, which I hate doing, or he'd try and defend me. And while I love him with my entire heart, I don't want to watch a fight between a junkie stalker and my underweight, nicotine-addicted boyfriend. So I kept it to myself and still haven't told him. But I did start accompanying him when he went out to smoke. The guy was usually outside. Sometimes he'd follow us for a bit before ducking away down a side street. Sometimes he'd watch from a distance. Sometimes he'd be up in his apartment. My boyfriend never noticed. I kept my composure and nothing happened. One night, though, we went out so my boyfriend could smoke, like normal. When we reached the end of the street and turned around, the stalker was behind us, about 50 feet back. I turned my head to check, and there he was. He waved at me, and something told me I had to get back inside. "Hey, babe," I said quietly to my boyfriend. "Let's get back inside, yeah? I'm cold." "Aw, baby," he said, kissing me on the cheek. "Okay, I'm almost done anyway." We walked back to the apartment building, and without turning, I knew that the stalker was behind us the entire time. I kept my hand intertwined with my boyfriend's and kept up the casual conversation we'd been having about how I hate geese. We got back up to my apartment, and he got changed for bed while I grabbed some water. So I've never lived in an apartment before, and I don't know if it's odd or not, but this building has a wired telephone to each unit that rings when someone wants let in. Ours never rings unless it's Uber Eats, so my boyfriend was surprised when it started ringing late at night when neither of us had ordered anything. "Probably just some idiot playing a prank," I said, unhooking the phone from the wall and putting it in the kitchen cabinet. He accepted that without a struggle, and we lay down in bed. After he was soundly out, I got up, got dressed, and grabbed a couple of things, and headed downstairs in my thick winter coat. Sure enough, my fanboy was out there in the parking lot. He waved at me and jogged over, smiling broadly. "Hey, man." "What do you want?" I said flatly. "Look, man, I feel like we ended things awkwardly last time, and I just wanted to talk to you," he said. "So you stalked me?" "What?" He started to look angrier, his brows furrowing. "No, man, I didn't stalk you. I just wanted to know when I could talk to you, but you always avoid me. Now you're walking around out here with that skinny little baby boy trying to rub it in my face, and I don't appreciate that at all. Look, man," he said, smiling again, stepping closer. "You want to go talk about this back at my place? Ditch the white boy and come hang out with me tonight. Please? I won't shoot up or nothing this time." He took another step closer to me. I saw in his right hand a dully gleaming piece of metal, a folded-up switchblade. He smiled at me, and I stepped back, shaking my head. His smile drained away into a deep scowl. "Listen, I'm done asking. You're gonna come over to my place now and finish what we started," he growled, unfolding the knife and pointing it at me. This dude was 5'8" tops and skinny. I'm 6'3", 200 pounds, and I regularly lift weights. Also, I had a 12-inch kitchen knife, which I drew from my coat pocket and leveled at his throat. He looked at my knife and then back at his and smiled. Bro, I was just playing. We can just talk right here, bro. Leave me and my boyfriend alone," I said very quietly, "or I will cut your face off and eat it." "What?" "I spent 8 years in juvie for stabbing a kid in middle school," I lied. He backed up, putting the knife back in his pocket. I took a step closer, holding my knife level. He backed away quickly, almost falling on the ice, until he was fully sprinting back to his place, and I was chasing him down with my knife until we crossed the street and I stopped, slid the knife in my pocket, and watched him run back to his building. Then, I went back up to my bedroom, told my boyfriend I just had to go use the bathroom, and fell asleep. When I was around 6 or 7 years old, my mom took me to a family gathering in the province. We live in the Philippines. Now, if you guys don't know how it works here, family gatherings in our country meant a feast for the entire family, including cousins, second cousins, grandparents, great-grandparents, aunts and uncles, etc. Safe to say it was an overcrowded party in a small rural setup in the province. Anyways, so the venue where it was held was owned by my mom's second cousin's kin. I remember walking around in a sea of people I barely know when I saw a small hut. It was tiny, fit for about just 1 to 2 people. It was old, made of straw and bamboo, and looked very unkempt. I asked one of the other kids about it. He said their grandfather lived there and that he was not to be bothered as he was old and cranky. So I went off and did my own thing, and I found myself playing near the aforementioned hut. As I was playing, the door slowly opened. It was dark inside, but I could hear someone saying, "Psst, psst." And an old thin man with long gray hair appeared and gestured to me to come near him. He was topless and wearing just boxer shorts that seemed too loose for him. I slowly moved toward the hut and I saw that he was on his bed, and he was patting the bed as if to tell me to sit beside him. I immediately got freaked out and ran away. And as I ran, I could hear the door squeak close and then shut. I didn't think anything of it afterward, but later on, after reuniting with some of my relatives, they mentioned that their grandfather, the old creepy guy, was known to do terrible things to children in their province. He would lure kids into his hut with toys or offers to play, and once they were in, he'd shut them in, touch them inappropriately, or worse. He did this to the neighborhood kids and even to his own grandchildren. Apparently, he thought it was his way of showing affection, so no one bothered to say anything until many years later when he passed away. I hope he rots in hell for what he did. And in hindsight, I'm glad I got spooked and ran away. Several years ago, I was using a dating app. It was all fun and games. Sometimes I met some people for hookups, sometimes I didn't, and most of the time I didn't even reply to those who only sent me certain types of pictures unsolicited. One day, this guy shot me a message on there. He was and is 4 years younger than me, meaning he was 18 at the time when I was 22. I didn't really consider him my type, but at the same time, I also didn't think it would hurt to get to know him. I mean, looks are just looks, and there have been plenty of times where I fell for a guy not for looks but for personality. So maybe that could have been the case too. I just came out of a pretty toxic relationship that involved lots of cheating and trust issues and insecurities, so I wasn't really looking for a new relationship, but it did feel good to get positive attention from guys. We started texting back and forth, nothing out of the ordinary, but I realized pretty soon that the part of his personality that he let me experience consisted of nothing more than, let's hook up. And look, I'm not trying to shame, because I wasn't that opposed to it. As I said, I just had a nasty breakup and was just looking for some fun. So I said yes. We exchanged numbers, agreed on a date, time, and place, and then we went back to our normal lives for now. I had a lot going on at that time. It was only a few months until I moved to a different place, so I already started planning for all that, and not just that, but a friend of mine invited me to come with them on a trip to Amsterdam, which obviously had to be prepared as well since that trip was scheduled 2 weeks before I was supposed to move. Therefore, it comes to no surprise that I kind of forgot about the guy, until the day we were supposed to meet up. He texted me a few hours earlier if we were still clear. After I scolded myself for forgetting, I told him that we were meeting as planned, even though that would throw my schedule off a little. So, I got ready for the date, and I kid you not even an hour before we were supposed to meet, he canceled. I mean, not too big of a deal. It happens that you can't always make it, so we scheduled another day, which he proceeded to cancel as well. Cancellation after cancellation, week after week, 7 different dates. Each time it allegedly was a sick relative or pet. So clearly I took that as he didn't really want to meet me, which would be fine. I'm not everyone's type either, and he could have at least had the decency to not lead me on then. So I told him off about his stupid behavior and blocked him. Maybe that was a little of an overreaction, but I just didn't want to waste my time with a guy that seemingly always found excuses to meet me, when I could focus on either the moving process, the vacation process, or with another guy who was actually interested. But then, he messages me on the dating app. How dare I block him? He wanted to meet me, but that I was just unappreciative and called me all sorts of expletives. Obviously, after that I blocked him on the app as well. I thought that I had heard the last of him, so I went on with my days. I already started forgetting him after a few weeks. And then another account messaged me, fake pictures and all, but it didn't take long for me to figure out it was him. He basically admitted it in the first day, so another block followed. Another account, another block. Day after day. I thought, what even was going on? He didn't want to meet me first, and now he creates new accounts on the daily to contact me? So I just had enough and wanted to tell him off again when he started to apologize for his behavior, that he was in the wrong and that he was willing to meet me if I was willing to still meet him. Trust me, I really wanted to blow him off, but in my mind, if I just met him and was really bad at hooking up or something, he'd just never contact me again. Stupid, but hey, it was worth a try in my mind. So we scheduled a meeting a few days before I was supposed to leave for the trip to Amsterdam, which I stupidly told him about. And since I didn't have a car, he offered to come to my place. Now, I would never ever give a stranger from the internet my address, but back then, I did. I mean, he couldn't possibly be a creep, right? So we met. He came into my house, we sat down on my bed, exchanged basic pleasantries, and then he stopped talking altogether. He didn't even look at me. Just to be safe, I wasn't a catfish. I looked exactly like I did in the pictures I had in the app. Only when I asked him something, he would reply with very few words. Until I asked him directly about if we hooked up or not. Then he suddenly started kissing me and, well, I don't have to go into detail. So when he finished, he just sat next to me, staring at the wall, not saying a word. At this point, I was pretty annoyed. I mean, I get being shy and all, but if it's that intense, how did you muster the courage to go on to a hookup? Anyway, after I went to the bathroom to freshen up, I had told him my roommates would be back soon, so he jumped up and said goodbye and left. I got no other messages from him after. Flash forward to my trip to Amsterdam. My friend, Joe, and I had lots of fun roaming through the streets of Amsterdam day and night, relaxing in our pretty fancy hotel and doing the usual stuff that tourists do. One day, we were just walking down a very busy road, very close to the main train station, when suddenly I heard a car honk loudly next to us. The traffic light was on red, so the person wasn't driving. I thought nothing of it and didn't even look until the guy started calling me by name. That voice was very familiar, and the face that belonged to it was still in my memory. It was my hookup. When I looked back, he smiled widely and called out for me to come over, but when he saw Joe, who at that point asked me who that was, the smile faded. I was dumbstruck, so I didn't say anything, but that wasn't necessary. The traffic light just turned green. People started getting agitated that my hookup wouldn't immediately go, so finally he focused on the road again and drove off. That was one heck of a coincidence, right? That he would be in Amsterdam at the same time. But why wouldn't he say so when I told him my plans? If he didn't want me to know, why call out to me in the middle of a busy road? I didn't allow my mind to think about him intentionally going there to find me. That was impossible. He wasn't interested in me anyway, right? Back at home, my phone started to blow up. Calls, angry texts, new profiles. Didn't matter that I told him to stop. Didn't matter that I threatened to block him. He told me that I was terrible for going out with another guy despite being in a relationship with him, that I was just like everyone else, that he deserved better than me. And then, he said that he had just been coming to Amsterdam for me. to surprise me. When I tell you I changed my number and deleted the dating app quicker than I possibly could have dreamt of, I mean I sprinted to my car, drove to the closest shop to get a new number. Not long after, I moved into the new place. I had 2 new roommates that were both in the same college courses I was in. We got along fine and the house was pretty big. One of my roommates inherited it from her mom. The moving went smoothly. I didn't get another text. I didn't get any messages on social media, and he didn't show up to my old place. Eventually, a few months go by. I basically had forgotten again. For more context, the house was in a village. Not even a small town, but a village. There were no shops, no nothing. Shopping we'd have to do in the next town that was approximately 4 miles away. My room was on the ground floor. The window of that room was right next to the entrance door when you were looking at the house from the outside. And right beside my room outside was the carport. The ground was covered in gravel, and once anyone moved, the light of the carport would turn on. It was a pretty hot summer day, so I sometimes slept with my window open. I wasn't that afraid because, once again, it was a small village, and barely anybody would drive through here. So one night, I was just sleeping, even had my back turned towards the window, and then I started to hear someone walking on the gravel towards my window. Immediately, I turned around, of course, and I saw a guy walking past my window, though he didn't look inside. He walked to the mailbox and seemed to throw something inside. Then he left again. I was stunned for a few seconds, but at least it wasn't a murderer, I thought. So as soon as I could move, I closed the window and kept it closed each night from that point onward. This actually happened a few nights, that someone would walk to our mailbox in the middle of the night, but nothing was ever inside, at least that I knew of. It was weird, but maybe one of my roommates were receiving something personal that they just didn't want to share. Cut to a few nights later, I was minding my own business when I suddenly heard some gravel again. My roommates had just gone to bed about half an hour ago, and I didn't hear anyone leave, so I thought it was just the mailbox guy. But this time, he didn't walk to the mailbox. He just walked to the carport. I know that because the light immediately turned on. I texted my roommates about a guy in our carport. One of my roommates, Sarah, who had a room across the hallway from mine, while Mary, the other roommate, had hers upstairs, texted back into our group chat that we'd meet with weapons at the bottom of the stairs to investigate. I grabbed scissors I had in my room and went to our meeting point. Turns out my weapons were the most useful since Mary came downstairs with a ukulele, and Sarah thought an empty plastic bottle would suffice. After laughing at the absurdity of our weapons choice, we started getting back in serious mode, going to the side door that led to the carport. Sarah looked through the window of said door, but didn't see anyone. The light was turned off too. Just in that moment, we heard someone tampering with our mailbox again. Not gonna lie, I probably peed my pants a little bit. Immediately, we ran to the front door, opened it, and looked outside, but there was no one, at least not that we could see. After a look in the mailbox, which was empty of course, we went back inside. Not even 2 minutes later, I got a text from an unknown number, saying how cute I looked in my nightgown, that no makeup made me look even prettier. He hoped that I'd come out alone so we could have some fun together like before I moved, but he was sad to find 2 other people with me. Needless to say that none of us slept that night. The police were called immediately and did a sweep, but no one was found on the property. He didn't exactly say it, but I know it was that guy, so I filed a report the next day. Nothing really happened with it, but since nothing else happened like that, I thought he got the message when we called the police. Sometimes I still get messages from an unknown number, but they're pretty harmless and don't really bother any further when I ignore them. But the fear in the back of my mind, that one day he would come back, stays, of course. In the meantime, I've taken up self-defense classes. I was living in Abu Dhabi when this happened, and I was 17 years old at the time. I've had a number of experiences from taxi drivers out there that could fit on this sub, but this one was by far the worst and creepiest. I'd like to share it with you all. It was Boxing Day 2012, and I was going to my friend's house for his Boxing Day party. He lived in a compound that was a bit of a drive off the island itself, and although not rural suburbs by most standards, this area could be classed as such. These residential suburbs were also still mostly in development. Every block had a new building site, plenty of empty shells of houses, no security cameras at the time, etc. There were no pavements either, just rubble and sand patches split by tarmac roads. Now, taxis in the UAE are crazy common. You just put your hand out and one pulls up. And back then there was less security. There were no cameras or mics in the car, just the meter. I hailed the cab and sat in the front, as a result of a past experience I had, and we set on our way there. Things start normally. We talk as I normally would getting into a cab. How long you've lived here, do you enjoy the place, etc. Eventually we're on the highway after we cross the water to the mainland. He pulls over on the hard shoulder and without saying a word to me, pulls out his phone and calls someone. He's speaking his native tongue and he's of South Asian descent, so I have no clue what he's saying. But I ask him politely to continue driving as the meter is still on. He nods, hangs up and gets going again. This happens a second time, again without word or warning, and now I'm suspicious. This time I ask him again to keep going, but he ignores me and keeps talking on the phone. We're on the highway, so I can't get out for fear of going splat, not being able to hail a cab or being jacked for jaywalking. After a few minutes, he gets going again and we pull off the highway, still heading the direction I needed to be. We reach the first roundabout where we need to make a right turn, but he goes straight. Everyone knows where this compound is. It's the biggest one in the city, and as a cab driver, there's no chance he doesn't know how to get there. So now I'm even more suspicious, and I kind of have a feeling of trepidation, like I know this vibe and what might be happening. I ask him to turn around at the next roundabout, but he ignores me. Now I'm getting agitated and angry, and I ask him to just stop the car and I'll get out and walk. Nope. He literally just ignored me and kept focusing on the road. At this point, I'm shouting at him, numerous expletives, etc., and it's clear that he's got something else planned. Eventually, he pulls off the main road onto a dirt track that led a couple of 100 yards into a massive building site, and he keeps driving down it. He then turns to me and tells me to get into the back seat and repeats this in an increasingly forceful manner to the point where we're shouting at each other. At the end of the dirt track is an old little minibus with roughly 5 dudes stood next to it. I don't notice this immediately. All I care about is that the car has stopped, and I'm in the front so I can get out. I'm not locked in. Inexplicably, I threw some money at him, I don't know, and jumped out of the car with my bag and started walking away, jogging back down the track. I can only imagine that the earlier phone calls he made were to these minibus men, as when I started getting away, they jumped in the minibus and drove down to catch me, as the taxi turns around and does the same. They all pull up in front of me, like police do in the movies when they stop a bank robber and jump out. The taxi driver runs right up to me, grabs me and screams point blank at my face to get in the bus. I can still smell and feel the damp heat from his breath as it touched my face, and the little bits of his spit hitting my cheeks. This honestly just enraged me so much that I grabbed him by the throat and pushed him against his car. I screamed something back at him, I don't remember what, and let go. They all get their phones out and started calling and messaging and moving towards me, so I just got out of there as fast as I could, running all the way down and back onto the main road and went to my mates on foot. I know I should have taken the number plate, ID number, etc., called the police even when I was in the cab, let alone after it happened. However, I was a 17-year-old with a bottle of Jack Daniels in my bag, on the way to a party with all my mates drinking, in a Muslim country with a drinking age of 21. The paranoia of trouble from that was enough to keep it quiet from the authorities, although I did tell every family member and friend. So yeah, if I could never meet you and your little minibus posse again, that would be great. This story started years ago when I was 5. I'm a 27-year-old female now. I lived with my parents and my sister at the time. The average working-class family, nothing out of the ordinary. Happy times. We moved to a different house in the same town, but I was sent to a new school because this one was way closer now. It is curious that I have these times pretty blurred out in memory because I was very young, but there are some days that I see as clear as water. This is one of them. My first day of this new school, I was very nervous. I wasn't the most extroverted or talkative kid. I was extremely shy and insecure and still am to this day. Once a very sweet and loving woman came and explained that she was my new teacher, but now it was English time and she took me to this class. There they were, my new schoolmates and my new English teacher. We'll call him LC. A man in his 30s, short, fat, with a big black mustache. If you got closer, you saw like food debris and saliva in it. It was disgusting, to be honest. We all then agreed that he was kind of a Super Mario look-alike. He welcomed me and introduced me to the kids. I said hi and sat with them on the floor. Many of them introduced themselves, made some jokes. They seemed very nice and easygoing, and I was somehow relieved. I felt integrated immediately. LC proceeded, and he told me to stand up and go in front of the class to practice the basics. My name is, I'm 5 years old, etc. I said it once. It makes me say it again, a bit louder. I say it twice. He tells me to repeat, insisting I must speak louder. I say it for the third time, and it seems like it was never enough. His tone began to sound angry, and he goes again like, again. He had me repeating this like 6 times until I started crying, and he finally told me to sit down. My mates told me it was okay and that he was just a jerk. My mom later asked me about my day at school, and I said everything was fine except for the teacher LC. I started crying and told her I didn't want to go to his class ever again. There was something about him, something dark. I didn't know what it was, but I felt it, and he scared the life out of me. Always trust your gut. Because the following weeks I kept whining to my mom the mornings I had English. But what could she do? She tried to calm me down, saying it was okay to have fun with my new friends and that he was just a grumpy teacher. I went to that school for 4 more years. I got used to him and his peculiar character. For example, he got really angry when a kid was late to his class. He yelled and told them to wait outside, sitting on the floor by the door, thinking. We were actually scared to be late. But there were also days when he was nice and fun. Time passed, nothing out of the ordinary except for one thing. He talked a lot about the FBI. We'd be with computers in class, visiting the FBI website, reading about the most wanted criminals and stuff. Not the average English lesson for 9-year-old kids. He took pictures of us saying that they were for the design of our own personalized FBI identification. A kind of game, I suppose. But it never happened. But we didn't think anything weird about it. Around Christmas time, he had taken a picture of the class to design a postcard. Years later, I was in high school, and an old classmate from that school tells me, "Hey, did you see the news? LC was found dead." I looked for it online, and I couldn't believe what I was reading. Police had found that LC had large amounts of images of children on his computer. In fact, the amount of lewd material found on his computers and hard drives was so vast that it made him one of the biggest ones in the entire country. When LC knew police were after him, he took his own life, jumping into the sea near the town's port, and drowned. I then remember that day when he didn't stop until I cried. I remember he scared me so much I didn't want to go to school. His FBI obsession, our photos, everything made sense. That darkness I felt around him. I knew I should have trusted my gut. So back in the start of the year 2020, everything was as good as I hoped it would be. Well, that's what I thought until one Sunday night. So I'll give you a little backstory which will be important later in the story. My dad had had a bad history with messing around in other people's relationships. Of course, I'm not happy about it, but anyways, a lot of men had gotten so angry at him that we started to have multiple men do such things, such as mess around with our cat houses, break lights, and other things which I can't explain, sadly. So on that Sunday night, it was 10 p.m., which means my sister's boyfriend has to leave due to curfew rules and so on. I can't remember clearly, but it was all chill and quiet and normal. At least that's what I thought. Keep in mind that my parents were not home except for me and my sister. It was time to feed our cats because we were going to lock all the doors to go inside. Then my sister whispers loudly to me to go to our back door, which led to our garage. Then we heard a low voice mumbling something as if he were trying to keep quiet. Then this unknown house intruder let out a loud sneeze, and that's when we knew that there was someone in our home. So me and my sister ran into her room and locked the doors to keep safe. She tried many times to call my parents and relatives that lived nearby, and nobody answered, and that's when I suggested her boyfriend. Luckily, he picked up and she told him the situation, so he quickly drove back. As he arrives and checked the garage and house, nobody was there, of course. I don't know what would have happened if nobody picked up the phone, but I'm happy we didn't. I was in a toxic, borderline abusive friendship with a girl from the ages of 9 to 12. Here's a little background information to give you a little understanding as to what my life was like back in the late 2000s, early 2010s. I grew up in a very tumultuous household. My parents hated each other, and my extended family, along with my immediate, were plagued by mental illness and drug addiction. Needless to say, I was a very anxious girl who was drawn to unstable people, and suffices it to say, they were drawn to me. I was a shy 11-year-old girl who, like many others before me, used the internet as a way to vent my frustrations and anger about my home life. This was the time where AOL was the main source of communication used between friends, and I was no stranger to this, along with MySpace and Facebook. However, I wasn't like the typical preteens of this era, or so I thought. I kept my profiles private, never accepted a follow or a friend request that I didn't know, and never shared my location on these said profiles. This is the part where I introduce Tanya. Tanya isn't her name, of course, as I don't want to use her real name in case she just so happens to read this thread, watches the YouTube channel, or listens to the podcast, so we'll just call her Tanya. Tanya and I met in elementary school, one of the points in my life where my family situation was quite volatile, and in retrospect, I think she sensed this. I was vulnerable, and Tanya took advantage of my innocence. She never really displayed any signs of her true intentions in the beginning, as they never usually do. She would do shady things every now and again, manipulate me into begging my mom to stay on the computer until the wee hours of the morning so we could go on not-safe-for-work websites, ghost me when I didn't give her my favorite pen, or yell at me when I couldn't perfect a guitar solo on Guitar Hero. She did some things to me that I believe my brain blocked out due to trauma. My mom didn't like her either. Parents always have weird intuition when it comes to friends, and I wish to God I would have listened to my mom before Tanya did what she did to me. Tanya's behavior changed for the worse when we turned 11. Tanya was openly jealous of my success in school. Granted, she was incredibly smart herself, but she always made it a point to mock me for having great grades and would always comment that since I wasn't pretty enough, having good grades would be a nice balance. Nice, right? It took me a while to build my self-esteem up after all the snide remarks she would make about my weight and my face, and only now as a 22-year-old do I think that I'm beautiful and have a wonderful figure. Anyways, back to Tanya. As a result of her jealousy and growing resentment towards me, she began to plot my downfall. I make no exaggerations either. This girl literally tried to ruin my self-worth even more than she already had. It started in 6th grade. Tanya and I were remarkably close that year, and I wanted to do everything with her. We would talk all day in school and would chat all night on AIM. One particular evening, Tanya and I were talking about boys. Being that we were hormonal preteens, our conversations would usually turn into who we liked in school that day. Being that I had a horrible relationship with my father, I didn't really trust boys, even from an early age, so it was rare if I developed a crush on one. I remember Tanya and I's conversation going a little something like this. Her saying, "Do you know Mark?" And me replying, "The kid in my class, yeah, why?" "I heard he likes you." "What? No way." "Totally, he told me. You want me to talk to him and give him your username?" "Of course. Oh my God, thank you, Tanya." My heart was racing. A boy liked me? Impossible. When Tanya told me that she would give Mark my username for AIM, I nearly exploded in my seat. 11-year-old me couldn't believe I was going to have my first real boyfriend. But how wrong I was. Fast forward to the next night, I was getting ready for bed when I heard the famous AOL ding sound off on my iPod Touch. You know the sound I'm talking about. When I checked the notification, it was a message from MarkyBoy99. I turned red. Tanya really had talked to Mark and gave him my username. She was truly the best. He messaged me with the usual, hey, emphasis on the 3 Ys, and I responded, hey. I didn't want to come off as desperate, so I only used 1 Y. Not even 1 minute later, he messaged me back. We talked all night about everything, our days, how school was, what type of silly bands we liked, typical 11-year-old stuff. I have to admit, I was smitten right off the bat. I think it was partly because I had never really had a boy like me before, and the other part being that my self-esteem was so low that I never thought a boy would be capable of liking me. Also, it could have been because Mark was one of the most popular boys in school at the time. He played football, was mouthy to the teachers, and was extremely outgoing. All the things a young girl would be attracted to. He talked for months, my puppy love growing for him more and more every time we chatted. Of course, I never spoke to him on the phone, nor did I get his phone number because why would you do that, right? All the while I was speaking to him, Tanya would be gassing me up, telling me how proud she was of me and that I deserved a boyfriend. My suspicions of Mark only began to grow when I attempted to approach him during school hours. Again, I had anxiety, so I'd never really speak to Mark outside of AIM. When I went to talk to him, Mark looked confused, as if though he's never had a conversation with me before in his life. He turned away from me on the playground and walked to be with his other friends. Weird. This wasn't like him. He was usually so chatty with me online that I expected him to welcome me with open arms in person. My ego was bruised. My little 11-year-old mind tried to rationalize this behavior by chalking it up to him not wanting to talk to the nerd since he was so popular and that he just preferred to keep our relationship online. I told Tanya the news and she seemed to be genuinely heartbroken for me. She was just as angry as I was and vowed to confront Mark later that day during music class. I was happy. Tanya had my back, and as far as I knew, she was going to tell Mark off about being a total jerk to me. Well, it worked. Later that night, I got a message from Mark telling me how sorry he was for ignoring me and that he was just going through some family things. Back in love I was. I didn't care that Mark ignored me during school. I didn't care that he rejected my advances in person as long as I had him to talk to online and Tanya's support. I was fine. I even told my mom about him and she was extremely happy for me as well. Another month passed and it was March 31st, 2011. Mark messaged me and told me that he had something very important to tell me the next day. The anxiety began. What was it? What did he have to tell me? At that point, I considered myself and Mark to be dating, so I was anxious that he was either going to break it off with me or that he was going to make us public in school the next day. I told my mom and Tanya, almost on the verge of tears of how excited and nervous I was. Well, the next day, April 1st, 2011, rolled around and this is what followed. It was around 7 p.m. and I was on Club Penguin as I usually was until I heard a familiar ding. It was Mark. It was time for the news I've been waiting for all day. Hey babe, winky face. Oh my god, hey, I've been waiting for you to chat with me all night. Sorry babe, I was at practice. Are you ready for the news? I was shaking with anticipation at this point. Even writing this now, a whole swell of emotions was resurfacing. Yes, of course, I said. It was then that Mark sent me a picture. I opened it, but only it wasn't Mark. It was Tanya. And she was holding a handwritten sign that said, Happy April Fool's Day. At first I started laughing, and I mean it was an ugly laugh. Of course, it was a prank. Tanya had gotten me so good, right? Right? Well, wrong. It was then when the realization hit me that I started to sob. I felt betrayed and like a loser. Tanya had been behind Mark all along, and she had been planning this big joke since October of 2010. She had been so jealous that she pretended to be someone else and string along my emotions when she knew I was already in a rough place mentally. She told me that I was stupid to even think that Mark would even like me in the first place, and that I was dumb for not asking for his number. Tanya had been at this for 6 months. An 11-year-old girl plotted Mark, used him to make me think that a boy liked me, and tricked me into believing that I had a boyfriend, all the while telling me when we hung out that she was happy for me and that Mark and I were a cute couple. I told my mom, who then called her mom. My mother was livid, to say the least. She told Tanya's mom to tell her daughter never to speak to me again. I was crushed. My best friend of 3 years had catfished me because she simply wanted to play a joke. I was loyal to her, and she toyed with my emotions because she could. Tanya had tried multiple times to guilt-trip me into being her friend again in the months that followed leading into 7th grade. One of the more memorable and honestly messed up times being when she messaged me a few days after my birthday in August to tell me that her mother had just died in a horrible car crash. Her body was dismembered, and they could only find her head and wedding ring. As anyone would be, I was in tears. Tanya's mother was nothing but lovely to me, and learning that she died in such a violent way was crushing to my soul. I started talking to Tanya again, asking her when her mother's funeral would be. Tanya then revealed to me seconds later, after speaking to her about the grisly details over her mother's passing, that she was kidding and was pranking me again, and that I was stupid to believe her. She even sent a video of her laughing at me. I was disgusted. Who would even say something like that? What now 12-year-old would message someone that their mother was dismembered in a car crash? She then revealed her ugly and quite frankly evil intentions when we were at the beginning of 7th grade and she became friends with a girl named Kaylee. They both invited me to sit with them at their lunch table, and because I was desperate for friends, I stupidly accepted, only to be met with hordes of insults and laughter behind my back every chance I wasn't looking. Tanya then messaged me one night telling me to take my own life, and that the world would be a much better place without me in it. She had Kaylee tell me to go jump off of a bridge. Tanya told me that she hated me and was never really my friend to begin with, that I deserved all the pain she put me through the year prior. I again told my mom, who then called the police. She had had enough of Tanya, and so had I. For 4 years I had put up with Tanya's malicious behavior, and I just couldn't handle it anymore. My mom made me delete my AIM account, and Tanya's mom told her to never contact me again, or else. My mom also advised me to move lunch tables, but I was focused on not letting Tanya win. For the entirety of 7th grade, I sat at the same table as Tanya, only I spoke to my friends at the other side of the table. I never spoke to her, looked at her, or gave her any sort of attention. Kaylee was scared to death of me afterward, too, as the police had gotten in contact with her and her family as well. It's been 10 years and I still haven't spoken to Tanya. I'm now 22 years old, have 2 bachelor's degrees, one in psychology and the other in history, and I'm now working towards a master's in clinical social work. Tanya did other things to me too, that I could write a whole other story about, but I think writing this one helped me give closure on that part of my childhood that scarred me for years. I thank God for my mom stepping in when she did, because I don't know where I'd be without her. As for Tanya, I don't know where she is or what she's doing, and I really rather not. On the off chance she stumbles upon this story, I have a message for her. Your jealousy and wishes for death upon me didn't win, and I truly hope that karma does not come around one day to bite you where the sun don't shine.
I'm a hunter. I like to hunt wild boar specifically, though I've been deer hunting and been known to get a turkey for Thanksgiving. I like to hunt boar. For those of you who don't know, boar is a big problem in the United States. A sow can have 2 litters a year, and it's not uncommon for a litter to consist of 10 or more pigs. Given that pigs eat anything and everything, it's not hard to see why the Department of Fish and Wildlife makes it legal to hunt them with almost no restrictions. In my state, it's illegal to hunt most large mammals with night or thermal vision scopes, with the exception of boar and coyote. I've been saving for a year, mostly fun money. It's hard to explain to your wife that a scope that costs literally twice as much as the rifle you're mounting it to is worth it. But I did it. I took it to the range and sighted it in. There was an area that was peppered with boar activity that I knew would be perfect for a night hunt. It was easily accessible with my truck, with easy to find spots that I could set up in that overlooked a large, easy to navigate clearing. The night started uneventful, mostly me just tinkering with my new toy, cycling through the settings. I was a little impatient. I spotted multiple deers, but they were out of season. And like I mentioned earlier, my current setup wasn't legal for deer. I moved to another spot that I'd seen days earlier. Probably wasn't much better than my first, but it gave me something to do, and a new angle to look around with my new scope. After about an hour or so of glassing the area, it dawned to me. The spot doesn't have much animal activity at all. No rabbits or owls. The deer that I had seen were 100 yards away from where I was. Why was this pocket of land so dead at night, but lively in the day? I set up around 10 p.m., and it was around 2 a.m. when I started to think about packing up, maybe setting up a target before I left and taking some practice shots. I heard the crunch come from the direction I came from before. I panned the scope over, and I saw the silhouette of a small bear pushing through the bushes. It's important to note that my scope isn't exactly night vision. It's a thermoscope, kind of like black and white version of what you see in the Predator movies. I adjusted my range and zoomed in a little. I remember jolting a little when I saw that it wasn't really a bear, it was a man. Because he was so low and hunched over, I thought I was looking at a young bear. Is that the game warden? It couldn't be. I would have seen the headlights coming from the road where I was perched. And where could he have walked from? I was 30 miles away from anything and on public land. I was about to call out when I adjusted my sight and noticed he was naked, no shoes, pants, or anything. I remember being disturbed by his movements, like a squirrel or something, twitchy and grabbing at the foliage, sniffing around and palming the tree. Was that my tree? The one that I'd been leaning against earlier? The thought terrified me. Could he smell me? Then he did something that I still have nightmares about today. He squatted and placed his hands in the dirt between his feet and stared straight up like a dog mid-howl. And I heard it. A voice coming from that direction. A very compelling female voice. "Help, I'm lost." There was a long pause, but neither of us moved a muscle. The center of my sight was trained in the dirt in front of his feet. I couldn't bring myself to aim directly at another person. It went against everything I'd been taught about firearms. Were they lost? Was this some guy that had gone crazy out here? Why was his voice so feminine? "Help, please, I can't walk," the voice called out. That's when I called bullshit. Not only could he walk, when I first saw him, he was traversing the land at ease for a naked person, so good that I mistook him for a bear. That's a fucking trap. This guy's trying to lure me to him with a damsel in distress routine. Luckily, the lack of activity before had caused me to pack up most of my gear. I think I may have left behind a hat and a sitting pad, but I didn't give a shit in that moment. I took my eyes off of him for a moment to get my pack on. I buckled my chest strap and scrambled for my rifle. To my horror, he was in the same position, but his face was staring in my direction, and I swear I saw a smile. The thermoscope has an effect that makes the animal's eyes appear white. How in the hell did he hear me get up and put my gear on? He must have easily been 150 yards away. He stood upright, and it hit me how tall and skinny he was. He was easily 6 feet and very lean. He took a couple of strides in my direction, and I instinctively sent a round sailing above his head in the tree line. He was freaky as hell, but he hadn't really threatened me. I was unwilling and unready to shoot someone. He stopped dead in his tracks and hunched down on all fours. "The next one will fuck you up. Go away." He stayed on all fours, and at this time, I had my sights trained on the center of him. His eyes were just above the grass, like a large cat or something. I was trying to stop my trembling and knew that my voice cracked a little on my last warning. I was terrified. The standoff probably only lasted a minute or two, maybe less, but it felt like forever. In an instant, he bolted to the left towards the tree line, opposite the road. So much for not being able to walk. I could barely keep him in my scope, he was moving that fast. He disappeared into the brush, and I sent another bullet sailing high in his direction. I racked up another round and tried to pocket that mag and swap it out for a fresh one, but I dropped it and didn't bother looking for it. I wasn't far from my truck and I wanted to get out of there. I could hear him in the distance yelling in his weird sound that could have been a laugh or a cry. I scrambled up the trail and arrived at my truck breathless. I tossed my gear in the cab and kept my rifle on the passenger seat as I sped off. For the longest time, I told the story from the perspective of having spotted some deranged crackhead living off the land like some kind of caveman. I reported to Fish and Game, but all they did was scold me for hunting alone at night. Never received an update. It wasn't until I told the story at a camping trip that my nephew told me about wendigos, rakes, and skinwalkers. My story scared the piss out of him because the spot that we were camping was technically the same forest I'd seen the bastard, just 50 miles east of it. He was so spooked, his mom, my cousin, had to take him home. She was really pissed. I've gone down the rabbit hole on these scary stories. I'm not saying what I saw was definitely a wendigo or a skinwalker. I'm saying that if such things do exist, I may have dodged quite a bullet that night. Or maybe it was just a tweaker, being Donnie Thornberry in the middle of the night. Either way, I thought I'd share.
Hey friends, thanks for listening. Click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. I release new videos every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If you got a story, be sure to submit them to my subreddit, r/letsreadofficial, and maybe even hear your story featured on the next video. And if you want to support me even more, grab early access to all future narrations for just $1 a month on Patreon, and maybe even pick up some Let's Read merch on Spreadshirt. And check out the Let's Read podcast, where you can hear all of these stories in big compilations and save huge on data, located anywhere you listen to podcasts. Links in the description below. Thanks so much, friends, and I'll see you again soon.